Hi everyone, and welcome to this revision video for Language Paper 1, Question 2. For this video, we are going to be looking at the extract that we've been working on in class, which is the Silk Road or the Stranger Child extract. And what we're going to be doing is running through the question. We're going to be having a look at some potential responses to that question, looking at how we can potentially revise and plan and prepare for this particular question. The extract is available in the link to this video, in the description for this video, sorry. I'm not going to read the full thing, but with question 2, we are working on a shorter version of this anyway. So if you do want to read that and see the question paper, that is available for you as well. So we are going to have a look at this question. As we said, the Silk Factory, I said the Silk Road at the start of the video. The Silk Factory is the extract we are looking at. It's a novel published in 2015, and the source there is also available in the link to this video. The question we're considering here is question 2. It's worth 8 marks, so therefore we're spending about 10 minutes on this question. And it says this: how is the writer use language within this extract to describe the garden? You could include the writer's choice of words and phrases, language features and techniques, and sentence forms. In reality, we know that if it says you could do something, it's that you should do something. So we know that we're looking for the writer's choice of words, the language features, if appropriate, and the techniques that are being used, and sentence forms, again, if appropriate. It's important to note that you are referring to a specific part of the extract, in this case lines 14 to 23, and they quite generously give you this as a selection within the exam paper. If you refer to things that are outside this extract, you will not receive full credit for that. So it's important to make sure that you're referring to what is there and what is given to you. So we've got this. Rosie had made a quick check of the unfamiliar garden before letting the children go out to play. The bottom half of the garden was an overgrown mess, a muddle of trees and shrubs. An ancient mulberry tree stood in the centre. Its massive twisted branches drooped to the ground in places, its knuckles in the earth like a gigantic malformed hand. The wintry sun hung low in the sky, and the gnarled growth threw long twisted shadows across the undergrowth within its cage. The trunk of the tree was snarled with the tangled ivy that grew up through the broken bricks and chunks of cement choking it. The path that led down towards the fence at the bottom, which marked the garden off from the orchard beyond, disappeared into a mess of nettles and brambles before it reached the padlocked door. So the first thing we need to do is to have a look at this extract. The things you are considering are adjective choices, verb choices, adverb choices, the use of imagery, the use of personification, simile, metaphor, the use of alliteration, the use of the senses, the use of semantic fields, if you want to include the idea of a particular group of words and group of ideas. So what you would do is spend a couple of minutes just highlighting and annotating the key vocabulary, the key ideas within this. And if it was myself, I'd be looking for things like the description of the tree, looking at personification such as gigantic and malformed hand, the simile there. You've got the personification of the knuckles within the earth. You have the adjective choices of gnarled, growth, the alliteration there, the long twisted shadows, snarled with tangled ivy. You've got the use of chunks of cement choking it, so that alliteration there. There's lots of really detailed descriptions that we can use here. So just spend a little bit of time just annotating, just highlighting the key ideas. And what you will end up with is something that looks a little bit like this, where we have the knuckles, example, annotated with personification, the idea of an unfamiliar garden being an adjective, the use of the gigantic malformed hand as imagery, but also simile. You've got the adjective tangled, the verb choking, the adjective gnarled, identifying these key elements of vocabulary that you can use. Now, in reality, you're probably only going to be using 2 or 3 of these quotations, but taking your time just to identify them is obviously very significant. To get into the higher bands within this question, the expectation is that you are referring to language in detail. So therefore, it's important to consider different interpretations of the same feature. So for example, if you were to look at the word twisted, there are multiple interpretations that you can have for this word, and you'll have seen this in class looking at different versions of different ideas. So with twisted, we might consider the act that twisted is something that has been messy, that things have been tangled together because the growth in the garden has been twisted. You could also argue that idea two, something that is twisted, is also a synonym for evil, something that is a twisted morality, if you like. So that's very different to idea one, that it's not physically twisted, it's morally twisted. You could also argue for idea three that twisted implies that there is some force that has done this, or some creature or some sort of supernatural element that has done it. So we have three different ideas: the idea that it's messy, that it's tangled, the idea that it is evil, and the idea that it has been done by some sort of outside force. And when we are starting to analyze our language, it's important to consider multiple interpretations of the same piece of text. So what we would end up with is something that looks a little bit like this. So for example, twisted could be chaotic, could be dark and evil. So we've got these interesting vocabularies such as unknown, disturbing, supernatural, paranormal, secretive, hidden. And we can use this as a developed response to the question. So what we have here is a response that I've done in several different stages to see how we can build this up. So the first thing we're going to be looking for is a point about the garden. So as I've said here, the writer uses unusual adjectives to describe the garden as overgrown, disordered, and out of control. We then need to embed some evidence. So we've got this. As Rosie observes the mess and the muddle of the garden, the alliteration emphasizes the narrator's confusion and distortion within her new setting. Note how I've tried to embed the evidence. So rather than saying, for example, I've tried to include it in a full sentence. So as Rosie observes a mess and muddle of the garden. We then have the understanding of the analysis of that language. The adjective muddled has connotations of chaos and a lack of structure, as the garden appears to be confusing and illogical. Taking it further, it could also suggest it's mysterious, unusual, and strange, further emphasizing possible supernatural elements. I've gone back to my quotation, tried to pick out a second part, supported by the adjective mess, which further evokes imagery of chaos and destruction. As readers, we are not sure whether the garden is neglected or has been destroyed by some unseen force. Overall, these adjective choices create the impression of unusual and supernatural setting of fear. I quite like the idea of colour code in these paragraphs, because if you see this as a lump of text, it does look quite intimidating, but essentially each small element doesn't take that much effort. It's just putting it together and this idea of structure. So we have a point. What have we found? The adjectives create a garden that looks out of control. What evidence do we have embedded? The first word talked about, which is muddled. A second interpretation of that word, supported by something else, and then overall how that makes us as readers feel. So as we can see, none of these parts of the paragraph are particularly lengthy. It's just getting it in the correct order and seeing how it looks there. Always going that little step further, thinking about alternative interpretations, thinking about further support, rather than stopping here, which is what we would normally do in Key Stage 3 with a point, evidence, explain. We are taking it further. What is the alternative interpretation? Could we think of something else to support this? And overall, how does this affect us within the whole extract? So, second example, this is all together. The point, likewise within the extract, the writer uses personification to give the garden a threatening personality and an evil presence within the story. The writer uses the imagery of a giant malformed hand with knuckles of the tree to create imagery of a deeply unsettled and supernatural garden. The adjective malformed suggests the tree is being twisted and is not growing correctly. It implies that something is deeply unusual or wrong with it. It could also imply it is irregular, that the garden is a strange and supernatural place. The adjective giant also reveals the tree is overwhelming and completely controls the garden like a guard. Overall, this creates an impression of intimidation and negativity within the garden for the reader, creating a tense atmosphere. Now, ultimately, what we have is 2 paragraphs, and that would be what we would be attempting to do in 10 minutes, looking at 2 different quotations and trying to develop them fully. It's more important to get the detail and the analysis rather than rushing through and trying to get a third done. Obviously, if you get more time, going to look at some extra interpretations would be great. But if you can get 2 paragraphs done in your 10 minutes, that is sufficient, and it will fully develop our understanding of language within this. Like I said, within the extract, within the link to the video, sorry, I will add the the links to the extract and the questions, so you can see those. Please feel free to screenshot those paragraphs and have a look at how we've color coded it and how we've put it together. And obviously use this revision video as a starting point if you are looking at any language paper one, because despite them being different extracts, the methodology and the ideas that you are looking for will be the same. The next video we're going to be having a look at is question 3, which is known as the structure question, which is a little bit complicated in terms of how the expectation of it is slightly different. And we will be focusing on that in a fair amount of detail. So thank you very much for your attention. Like I said, any links to the extracts or any comments you would like to add to the video for things that you're unsure of, I'll try and answer those as quickly as possible.